This week we're going to start talking about propaganda and persuasion and how those two work in concert to go through and affect the way that people think, the kind of choices they make, the decisions that they're making, even without them knowing about it. I've said at the top of the semester that we're going to take the persuasive theory and the models we've been looking at so far and apply them to social media and the different types of propaganda that have been perpetuated, mostly by Russian trolls, to go through and to change the effects of democracy here in the United States, and no small issue really there as we talk about that. So I wanted to introduce you a little bit to the idea of propaganda. You probably have your own concepts of this, and most of them are pretty close. We kind of mix them up with dogma, or maybe even confuse them with rhetoric, and propaganda can be rhetoric. But there's some characteristics here that I wanted to go over with you initially as we start to maybe make some application of the persuasive principles we've been talking about. But a little milk before the meat here, before we get into really making some solid applications. We need to understand some terms and propaganda and what our vulnerabilities are there with that whole idea. So 3 characteristics of propaganda. The first one being that it's not by accident. Propaganda just doesn't pop out onto a screen or into a meme or into a commercial or into a State of the Union speech. It's created deliberately. It's created by propagandists. And, a marketer could be a propagandist. Certainly a politician is a propagandist. There are people out there who spin. We have fringe media who are propagandists, and they're putting out material that has a definite agenda to it, a definite communication objective for them to go through and accomplish, and that is to get you to thinking about something that you might not have already considered, or maybe to get you just within your own default thinking as well. Like, it goes a number of different directions that way. So first is the idea that propaganda is created by a propagandist. And this is somebody who wants to go through and set an agenda or frame an issue. And those are 2 concepts that we'll get into a little bit later on. The propagandist puts forth rhetoric as an absolute truth, that there's really no debate or negotiation around whatever that propaganda issue might be. And they can use that absolute truth or shore it up, I guess, maybe is the better term, what we might consider to be an absolute truth with true facts. There might be some facts roaming around out there that they go through and gather up and then turn that into some kind of absolute truth. We've certainly seen that with the rhetoric of the wall here lately. We certainly saw that in the latest State of the Union address. If you looked at numbers in terms of the threat that America somehow is under because of illegal immigrants coming in across the border, the numbers are telling that there are some issues going on. But if you looked at the facts behind those numbers, the numbers being the truth, but if you look behind the facts of those numbers, like where are these people inundating the country? Well, it's not happening at the borders. It's happening at ports of entry. It's happening at airports. It's not necessarily going on at the border. And so that goes through and undermines the whole propaganda idea that there's some kind of crisis going on there as things go. If you're a Trump supporter, I don't know what to say. This is a pretty easy way for me to go through and illustrate these concepts and ideas. I'm sure there are lots of other ways for me to do that, but here we go. So first off then, propagandists create propaganda. Secondly, it's put out there as the absolute truth. And third, it's used to go through and psychologically manipulate people on a number of different levels. And we've talked about a number of those levels so far as persuasive theory is concerned. What's used to go through and resonate with our values or with our own ideology? What kind of parables are out there that get us to go through and make some kind of connection or relationship with the content that's being put out there? Something to get us nodding our heads, oh yeah, that's exactly the way I feel, without us having really examined exactly the way we feel. those are default attitudes that we've talked about as far as attitudes are concerned. And many of us don't even realize that we are defaulting to them. And when something comes along that resonates with that default attitude, we are easily persuaded to go through and go along or agree with that idea. Like, oh my gosh, the country is under siege by a bunch of rapists and robbers who are coming over the border into our country. To make that even worse, then, is media. Marshall McLuhan had a lot to say about the auspices of media and what that does to us in terms of perpetuating propaganda. It is the propaganda machine, and so we need to be wary of things that are being put out there and need to go to our sources, and that sounds like a broken record. Social media, wow, that's a whole different ballgame, because first, if we had pundits dealing with pundits and politicians, agenda setters, those kinds of people putting out propaganda, it's in what we call a vertical structure, meaning that it's top down. They're going through and putting out information that goes through the media and hits the constituents. It hits the polling people. It's the constituents, I guess that's the word I'm looking for. And it feeds them information and ideas. And it does that through repetition. It does that through saturation. It does that through authority, through all the different types of persuasive theory that we've already talked about, okay? Social media takes that vertical structure and it turns it horizontally, where everybody can go through, anybody can go through. If they have a device like this phone, they can go through and put up propaganda. They can go through and put up messages that go through and resonate within certain forums or certain Facebook posts or certain Facebook groups. And they know, if they know what they're doing, they know that if they take that message and insert it within a specific group who already, by their own default, believe that there's a crisis going on, for example, as far as immigration is concerned, that propaganda is going to resonate with them even more so. It's a done deal. In fact, this has never been easier for us to go through and perpetuate this kind of crap, for lack of a better term. So you might be scratching your head thinking, well, okay, so what's the difference between propaganda and what you're doing here, Eric, as far as education is concerned? And that's a very valid question, because I could very well be a propagandist myself and talking about propaganda, as the case might be. I'm not, okay? I'm just trying to raise some awareness here and teach you how we can eliminate our own vulnerabilities to propaganda. Here's the difference between propaganda and education. And you've heard this before, okay? And I hate to knock off anything, but propaganda tells you what to think, and education teaches you how to think. And that's all I'm trying to do here as things go. So for what that's worth. This whole concept of propaganda, it's not new. It's been around as long as we've been printing the page, as long as we've been speaking from some type of podium. The term came about in the 1600s when Catholicism decided to go through and embrace this whole concept that in order to put down the Protestant movement, that they needed to put out the absolute truth as far as propaganda was concerned. And so it's gone from that all the way to the latest State of the Union address that we just watched. Modern propaganda proliferates there. That's what I'm trying to say, though even more so, more easily now through the media, especially social media, and especially things like Facebook or Instagram. Social media sites that are set up to go through and provide our own echo chambers. They're telling us what we want to hear. And so the propaganda, like I intimated a little bit ago, is easier to go through and figure it out. The problem is when propaganda starts to go through and undermine democracy. If you think about it, the whole concept of democracy is that the people have a will of some sort. And that voting population has some kind of influence on the people who represent them. We want emancipation, or we want better health care, or we want whatever the case might be, whatever we might be articulating. And in the real world model, those ideas, those desires burble up to the top through our elected representatives who take their meetings with their constituents to their chambers and draft bills and drop legislation and go through and vote on it, and then somehow we become represented, okay? Someone would argue the difference between a representative democracy and a republic here, but I'm not going to get into that. The problem with that is when it goes the other way, when we have our elected officials creating propaganda, coming to us and telling us what we think we want to hear, what we think we want. Here's what you want. You don't want that. This is what you want. This is what we need you to do. This is how we're going to, because look how much better it's going to be, and blah, blah, blah. And again, we've certainly seen that. That's never not been the case over the course of my lifetime. I'm not going to get an account how many presidents, how many administrations I've lived through so far. Hopefully I'll live through a few more as that goes. But that's been the churning machine of politics, is to go through and tell us what they think we need to hear. And that's been the bane of our own mediated democracy as far as propaganda and those persuasive messages that come out to us. Because, we automatically ascribe these people with some level of credibility because, well, they must know what they're talking about because they were voted into office, or they're an attorney, or they've been educated on some level, or whatever, right? We automatically attribute, much like I was trying to get you to do with Paul Harvey. Well, okay, you probably know that better than I do, so I'm going to go through and vote for you or support that issue, whatever the case might be. That's where we are. That's the danger of our own democracy right now. And now we have more channels that now on a horizontal level from each other to go through and obliterate the truth of what the people want to begin with. And that's what the Russian Reach did. That's what happened with the 2016 election, what's currently going on now. Elizabeth Warren just tips her hat and says, hey, I think I'm going to run for president here. I just heard this on the radio while I was driving out here. And within moments, there were 65,000 different messages, propaganda messages that were perpetrated. And those are the ones that somebody, I don't know who's counting this stuff, but somebody's picking up on across the internet from all kinds of fringe news sites, from blackface to her Pocahontas comments to, it's immediate, it proliferates, it's ubiquitous, it's free, if not extraordinarily cheap to go through and create propaganda now and put that out there. And for some reason, we believe it. So that's what I'm trying to get you to stop doing. To understand how persuasion works, how it goes through and makes our mind think different things, and yet at the same time, we think we're the ones who came up with whatever that thinking might be. That's kind of gaslighting. And in fact, I guess we can go through and say that's what, and as a producer, this pains me to go through and say this. We are being gaslit by the media, by mainstream media, by social media, and consequently being gaslit by, well, I'm getting a little dark here, so I'm going to stop at that point. Okay, so those ideas about propaganda, I'm going to put up a number of posts this week for you to go through and study and read. I might put up a discussion post as well as we start to make this connection between persuasion and propaganda. If you have anything to say about this video, please feel free to comment. I'll put this up maybe on a discussion post where you can do so, or maybe in the announcements. I'll figure that out tonight as I go through and post it, okay? Hope you're all doing well. And if you have any questions, you know where to find me. Okay? Thanks.